We have Stephen Wolfe from the Beyond Earth Institute tonight, and we had Stephen on 5 years ago or so for Spacecom Expo, because Stephen does a lot of different things with the space industry, and one of his newest endeavors is the Beyond Earth Institute. So we'll learn more about that tonight. Thanks for joining tonight, Stephen.
Yeah. I'm glad to be here. I know you had 22 people signed up, and however many it is, it'll be great. I have a bunch of information that I have to share with you all, and I appreciate this opportunity because for the most part, I haven't really given as thorough a presentation of like this to an audience like this. That's I've been mainly talking to specific people, explaining to them what the Beyond Earth Institute is about and what we're doing. And now, so this gives me a good opportunity. And so I definitely want to encourage you to think about what I'm saying and give me your feedback on what you're hearing. And any kind of feedback or conversation, that's what I'm really looking forward to in this call. Let's see, I see Jasmine Perez, hey, and Vivek Patel. That name sounds familiar. Michael Mooring, and that's it for right now, right? As more people will trickle in, or are there more people?
Yeah, we have 10 right now. Yeah, some people join late, sometimes pretty late,
Okay.
but that's okay. We're recording it as well, so if the edit comes out good, we can put it on YouTube later.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. I just very interested. I just trying to see if I recognize some folks. There's Eva Jane. How are you? Haven't seen you in a while. So let's see. Okay. So this is great. I want to before I talk about Beyond Earth, maybe it'd be helpful to give a little background about who I am, where I've come from. I'm certainly someone that has been a lifelong space advocate since my early teens. I was first certainly excited about the lunar landing, the first one. So I'm old enough to remember that experience. But my interest didn't really go into hyperdrive until I was exposed to the work of Gerard O'Neill, right? So this was the individual who developed the technology and showed how possible it was to create cities in space. It was quite remarkable. As a matter of fact, they just released a documentary about the life of Gerard O'Neill. I definitely encourage you to see it if you haven't already. It's called The High Frontier, The Life of Gerard O'Neill. So it is, it's very well done as far as biographies are concerned. So I encourage you to do that. So that exposure really, even though I was a teenager at the time, it really sort of stopped me in my tracks, from just being a teenager, right? And maybe we all have those kinds of moments where we suddenly realize, wait a minute, it's not just about me in this little house and going to school and playing baseball or with my friends. There's a bigger world out there, and frankly, there's a bigger solar system out there, and what does that really mean, for me and for society and all that. So I then went to I got a degree from RPI and actually went to Capitol Hill. After that, I was really turned on by political action, and kind of went to Washington and caught what's called a Potomac fever, and became very interested in that, and landed a job in a congressional office for a member of Congress from Southern California. His name was George E. Brown Jr. and I had the opportunity to work on space policy. So it was I was as happy as could be doing that, working with the committee, working on the annual budget. At the time, the shuttle was just launching. The International Space Station was a committed project of the agency, and they were, so there was a lot of enthusiasm for the potential for space at that time in the 80s. In many ways, it's like it is now, only now it's even more so. And so I was on the Hill during the Challenger accident, and that was very, very depressing. And got through that. But before I left the Hill, I had always had in my mind this original passion for space settlement that was articulated by Gerard O'Neill. And didn't necessarily have to be in free space, could have been on the moon or Mars. So I want to be clear that I'm agnostic. When I say settlement, I'm really agnostic of where those settlements would be. And so I, in a moment of a moment of insight, I drafted something called the Space Settlement Act. This is in 1988, and to my surprise, my boss, the Congressman Brown, said, "Oh, this is great. Let's introduce it. let's run with it." And the bill essentially was a declaration of Congress that said that all of our activities in space will ultimately lead to space settlement, and that this is a good thing. It's consistent with our Constitution and so forth, and it laid out a requirement for NASA to report every 2 years on the progress being made towards settlement. So it was I think with the help of significant help of the advocacy community, the L5 Society or the National Space Society at the time, and other folks, and my own elbow grease, we quite remarkably, and my boss too, who believed in it, quite interestingly, the bill was folded into the NASA Authorization bill at the time, and then it was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan. So that was a great moment. But I tell this story because at the time, many people said that really spending much time thinking about space settlement we're really ahead of our time, right? This is the late 1980s. We had just gotten back to flying the space shuttle. We're really ahead of our time. That's how NASA thought, and so NASA ultimately chose not to adhere to the reporting requirement, and ultimately found the loophole and a loophole to something called the Paperwork Reduction Act, allowed NASA to cancel that effort at the time. And to a degree, I agree that we were ahead of our time. But I think, like a lot of things, that if we had stuck with that, my whole intention at the time was to create a body of knowledge from which people who in the future could draw upon, that would allow them and better enable them to actually create these space settlements. I'm now calling these communities beyond Earth, by the way. And I'm going to talk a little bit about vernacular and all sorts of things. But we have to fast forward 30 years, more than 30 years into the future. And my attitude is, and actually the attitude of the Beyond Earth Institute is, not only are we not ahead of our time, we're actually playing catch up. The the evolution of humans to move beyond Earth permanently and creating new branches of civilization is actually upon us, you know, and we need to take that very seriously. We don't actually see that happening right now, but if you look at the intentions and the deliberate efforts of folks like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and even what's going on at NASA, these are the early signs. And if we can ultimately follow through, and there aren't too many setbacks, you know, this is the beginning of the flight path, if you will, towards creating communities beyond Earth. And I think that would be my introduction to share now with you some slides that I have. Let me see. A host disabled. I need I need permission, I think.
All right, let me see here.
Let's see who else is here.
All right, try now.
Okay. Aha. Okay. Here we go. So let me go back a couple more years. So I had as 5 years ago. That's a good. Was it really that long ago, Michael? That I met with you guys with about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I joined with an organization called Spacecom, and essentially is a major international trade show and exhibition in Houston every year, where all the space industry comes together to do the things that industries do at trade events. I was responsible for the content, developing the speaker, developing the program, and the themes, and so forth. And in some ways, this was a great opportunity. Allowed me to reconnect with a lot of people that I had worked with in the '80s, who now CEOs or owning their own companies. Folks like Jeff Bezos and George Whitesides and Courtney Thad. So it was because I had basically been out of the space industry for a couple of decades, and so it was great to reconnect. But in similar fashion to what happened to me on the Hill, there was a point at which 4 years or so into this experience, where I started ruminating again on my original passion for space settlement, and contemplating, okay, what is needed, what is most needed that I could perhaps make a difference and contribute. And so as a result of this, 2 years ago, just about 2 years ago now, at the ISDC, the International Space Development Conference, sponsored by the National Space Society, I reached out to them and said, well, you know, would you be interested in a seminar on space policy as it relates to a space settlement? And they actually were thrilled. And it turned into a full day paper seminar where we had over 20 speakers, keynotes, and people who had written papers for this event, where we looked at a wide range of issues and policy issues that would impact the development of space settlement. It was very successful, and out of that came a cohort of folks. Some folks I knew, some were new acquaintances, and where we said, you know, how do we carry this forward? And we began to meet on a regular basis, and we ultimately said, well, let's do a paper. Let's just do something interesting together. And then once we completed that paper, we said, you know, well, we believe passionately in this, so let's let's just move ahead and create an organization around this. And that's exactly what we did. And that's how the Beyond Earth Institute came about. Um, and So now, so essentially the mission of the Beyond Earth Institute is to establish and sustain a policy and legal framework that enables economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. Let me dissect this a little bit. So, you know, there's many folks in the space community, right, are focused on entrepreneurship. How do we get the hardware? How do we make money, right? So if we could be like if everyone could be like a Elon Musk, we could make a fortune, and then we could take that fortune, we could spend it on advanced space projects. So, but what we saw was that there is a kind of a gap in terms of people really spending the time that's needed on the policy side of that. And that if you have a policy framework, it can help accelerate a process towards our mission. I'm going to talk a little bit about this term, communities beyond Earth. And let me just put it out there right now. When well, I'll tease it, and then we can talk more about it later. So when I say communities beyond Earth, I'm talking space settlement, okay? And so from now on, I'm going to try to just use that term, communities beyond Earth. And in a little bit, I'll explain the reasons for that, although some of you, I imagine, could guess, but let me move along. So we really saw that there is a society that's kind of poised, so kind of ready for it. So we know that there's the billionaire rocket boys are out there, and that's a major driving effort. We have a new generation that's growing up, and many of you may be on the call here with science and science fiction. There's a high expectation that one day you or someone you know is going to be able to live and work in space. Space transportation, the cost of that is coming down dramatically. We are about to see I mean, there's been major changes in the last 10 or 15 years in space. With the advent of Starship technology, so let's, yes, it's SpaceX, but let's just call it generically the Starship technology. If that works out as Elon wants it to, it's going to profoundly change the ability to lift kind of mass from Earth to space that is needed for significant construction and capability in space is going to be completely unparalleled, and that will change the dynamics to no end. And life will just, literally life in 20 years will just not be the same as it is today. And along those lines, and this is the last point here, along those lines, the technologies for enabling space settlement or communities beyond Earth is really coming online. And I think the program that NASA is doing is a big part of that. Certainly European Space Agency as well. And frankly, agencies around the world, proliferation of agencies around the world. We're seeing this, so the other key technologies are being developed. So we see this society, again, a society poised. We're ready to make a significant change. So the challenges here is that we see it. There really hasn't been an organization that has focused holistically on the legal and policy framework for enabling economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. There's a lot of point number two. There's a lot of space policy groups that are doing excellent work, very focused on very near-term stuff, as we should be. Right? There's a lot of things just with the low Earth orbit economy that is emerging right now, especially with the satellite constellations, the many thousands of satellite constellations that satellites that are being put up and planned over the next 10 years is extraordinary. Just managing that alone, and the implications of the satellite applications for Earth are astounding, and so that's taking up a lot of the effort. So and so and third, when we look at the complexity, right? So it's one thing to land on the moon, plant a few flags, walk around, pick up some rocks. That alone is usually complicated, right? So there's no question about it. And so when we are talking about the complexity of a community of 100, 1,000 people living indefinitely, then it's a whole other order, and it requires from a policy standpoint, it requires additional attention, another level of attention. So these are some of the challenges that we're looking to address. So beyond Earth, what are the particular areas of focus that we're looking at right now? These will certainly change over time. I talk quite a bit about the Space Settlement Act of 1988, and that was a declaration of communities in space as a national and international goal. There's certainly more that could be done there. By all means, it could be an international goal through the UN. There could be more that NASA could do. I should say Congress for the U.S. And certainly other countries are looking at this as well. Second, we're enabling related science and technology development. Again, we want, and this gets to that point that technologies are coming online, but we really need to continue to push the envelope on the technologies that are going to be needed, that are on the critical path to creating communities beyond Earth. The financial part, promoting advanced financing mechanisms. How do you pay for it? Right, so we talk about the big price tag. Excuse me. If we're going to the moon, sending humans into space, when you're talking about something that's going to house a facility that's going to house 100, several hundred people, again, not only complexity goes up, the cost goes up, and what is required is a creative way of managing the finances, managing the risk, right? So there's a lot of money. It's not that there isn't money available, right? So you may be talking about a couple hundred, let's say you're talking about $100 billion. Some people will say, oh, you could do it for much less than that. Some people will say, you need a lot more than that, but let's just say $100 billion, for argument. It's not that there isn't that much money out there. There's investment money out there for that, but nobody wants to put their money down nobody wants to necessarily put their money at risk, right? So, you need a creative way of managing that risk through partnerships with government, through government government investment side of it, private sector side of it, so that there's a ROI for the private sector, and also individuals putting a stake in this. So there's and we'll talk more about. I talk a little bit more about that later because it relates to a project that we currently have going on. Then we want to establish rules of laws and norms of behavior. This is something that goes out a little bit further once we're actually there, but we don't think it's too early to begin to have a dialogue in that regard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in terms of what we're doing in that area. And then permitting criteria and approval process. So if you think about if you compare a space settlement to, say, a housing project on Earth, then how do you get that permitted? Who do you go to? What do you so if you have a consortium that says, okay, we've got a plan to build a 1,000-person habitat on the moon. Where do they go to get approval? I mean, now some people will say, well, they'll just go, and if anybody stops them, then they'll worry about it. But I don't think that's realistic, and I think investors want to have they want to have the confidence that that governments are okay and are supportive and so forth. So they can be very conservative that way, and we need to recognize that. So that's an interesting dimension. So let me move on here. So close this. So so I've talked a bit about what is the first such community beyond Earth, and how do we get to that first foothold. But we're also looking at this from a bigger picture, from a longer term picture. How do we get what happens after that first one? What happens for the long term? Because we really want to set a policies that can apply to an unfolding future where communities are being created on the moon and on Mars and in free space and wherever, and it applies. It also helps to enable that kind of unfolding. So, so that's important. The methodology, we are so we're primarily research. We call ourselves a think tank, so I need to be clear on that. We're not an advocacy group. So we're not like NSS. We actually would like to do the kind of research that NSS and other advocacy groups might want to pick up on and use it as justification for their legislative advocacy and lobbying. And the same would go for industry and for Congress and for the administration. We're analyzing, what are the current policies and activities or trends that are emerging. We're making recommendations for policy changes. Again, we're going to educate Congress about these recommendations, but we're not lobbying. We are engaging the entire stakeholder community, which includes the industry, academia, government, individuals. So we want to be a place that those folks that are most interested in this have a place to come to engage. Education, there's certainly education goes on with the stakeholders, with Congress, and those folks. We certainly want to be educating the public at large. We want to be a place where the public can come for this kind of information as well. And over time, we'll create products that are more public facing, although that's not a priority right now. And certainly we want to have significant influence throughout the space community. We have the right team. This is not all our team. This is the team. This is folks who have policy chops. You may recognize some of the folks here. You may recognize Greg Autry. Last year, he was nominated to be the chief financial officer at NASA. He actually went through a congressional hearing, was questioned by Ted Cruz, in fact, and however, the election came and he kind of ran out. I guess he ran out of runway, and so he actually reached out to us and said, "I like what you guys are doing, and I want to be part of it." So what NASA's loss is our enormous gain there. Tony DeTore, I don't want to get into Tony DeTore, though I will say he's a long time Hill staffer on the science committee, and he actually helped to draft a follow-on bill to the Space Settlement Act, and his boss introduced that, I believe, 2015, 2016 timeframe, and that got quite a bit of attention. So you know, we are very much of like minds, he and I. So it's a good team. We have advisors as well, and we've been holding back a little bit, adding to this. As you know, we've been around for a year, but to a large extent, we're still very formative, right? So, but we've attracted Pete Warden, who was the former head of the Ames Research Center for NASA. Courtney's dad held multiple positions throughout the administration, space leadership positions in Department of Commerce and NASA. James Muncie has been working space policy for the first people that I met in Washington, by the way. He was with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but he's also been on the Hill. He's worked in the administration, and he's a leader in shaping space policy and is an ardent, I should say they all are ardent supporters of developing communities beyond Earth. Michelle and Laura are top academics. Michelle, by the way, is right now is the president of the National Space Society. Chris is the head of the space. He's co-director of the Air and Space Law program at the University of Mississippi, and Stefan Recchi is a leader in entrepreneurship development. So it's an exceptional pool of talent that we're able to draw upon, and as well as many others. I do want to I do need to do a shout out to our sponsors. We're just in the process of really developing our sponsor base, but the Sierra Nevada Corporation and the Highline Prize Trust were early supporters of us, so I definitely want to recognize them. So what I want to do in this next little bit is I want to do in the next little bit. I want to tell you what's been going on. So up till now, I've told you about what the organization is, what we do, what is our mission, and how we're going to function. Now I want to talk a little bit about what we've been up to. Right. So we've been operating for about a year now. What have we been up to? And then a look ahead in terms of what's coming down the pike for us, right? So, and then after that, we can have hopefully we can have a robust conversation. Again, very interested in your thoughts and ideas, frankly. So we really, we are so starting with this. We are a primarily a research think tank, right? So our first paper was around creating policy recommendations to accelerate the establishment of communities beyond Earth. And this was as a result of interviewing some nine space policy experts. I'll just leave it at that. And consolidating and cross-referencing their recommendations as a result of these interviews. And what we came up with was a set of recommendations that on the surface may not seem that dramatic, but are ultimately very important if you are aiming to create communities at some point. So the first one had to do with that the U.S. needed to revamp the arms and export control regime, including ITAR and CFIUS. This is if you're in the aerospace industry and you're trying to sell to foreign governments and so forth, you understand the challenges of this. But if so this has application, very near-term applications for folks. But again, it's that long-term view that we have that says if we need to solve this now so we don't run into this kind of problem later on when we're trying to source what is by its nature a major international effort to construct a space community. So the next one is the international aerospace industry should establish voluntary norms of behavior. So I mentioned norms of behavior earlier on. So this came up very clearly, and this relates, and this would be industry to industry, right? So, and that's important from like a top-down, like government instituted norms, right? And this would allow industry to sort of govern or regulate itself, right? So we wouldn't have to have government to regulate it. And if we could begin to have this industry-wide conversation, it would include government for sure, then that will put us that far ahead in our goal or towards our goal. And then we want to, and third, we want to continue to direct continue in the direction of NASA's Artemis Accords. Now, you all may be familiar with the Artemis Accords. Hopefully you're familiar with the Artemis program, which is NASA's program to return astronauts to the moon by 2024. In that context, the Artemis Accords were created as an international set of agreements that relate to how countries will conduct themselves in space. So it is probably for the first time since we've passed international space treaties that there's been a significant effort to come up with agreed upon set of norms for governments to behave in space with each other. And certainly we want to expand those such that they would be particularly relevant to establishing permanent communities beyond Earth. So that report is available on our website, beyondearth.org. You know, in our resources session, encourage you to download that, take a look at it. The next thing that we took a look at was definition. You remember I mentioned earlier, you know, we're only going to talk, I'm going to try to only use the term communities beyond Earth. And this project came up because, and some of you may know be familiar with this discussion. When you say colonization, or you say settlement, in conversation amongst, well, just anywhere pretty much, those terms evoke the kind of colonialism, empire building, European domination kinds of images, right? And so with this paper, we've taken a conscious effort to say, is there another term that we could use besides those? And we've arrived at communities beyond Earth, and we've defined it as a group of people building, sustaining, and growing an economically vibrant, self-governing society outside the atmosphere of our home planet. Now, this was a risk for us, and some of you may look at this and say, wait, I have something to say about that. And that's fine. That's fine. We can have that conversation. But we are trying to be, you know, we're not trying to be PC, but I think that we are trying to, you know, words do matter, I guess. And, you know, if we could change the language, and it's going to make our message easier for people to accept, then it's worthwhile, right? So, so just moving on here to really, we've had just enormous success. We've had enormous success with our webinar series. We've been able to attract some incredible speakers to those programs. You may recognize some of these folks. On the top row there, just going from left to right, Chastity Whedon. She's the chair of the ComStack at FAA. ComStack is the main advisory body to the FAA's Office of Space Transportation, and she's also with she's also a VP with Astroscale, which is, amongst other things, looking into how to deal with space debris. Very important thing. She's senior executive. Next is Mike Gold. You may know him. He spoke when he was a senior executive at NASA. And as a matter of fact, he spoke on the Artemis Accords, and he is the main architect of the Artemis Accords. So it was very fortuitous for us to have him join us, and he was fantastic. Now, of course, he's moved on. He's working government relations for Redwire, which is a major holding company in the space community. Next is Kathy Leaders. She is the head of the Human Space Program, which includes the Artemis program at NASA. So very fortunate to have her. Actually, Doug, on the next row, Doug Lavero was actually her predecessor. So, and he's went off, but he's come back and spoken to us. Tori Bruno, anyone follows the industry, Tori Bruno is the CEO of ULA, and he is a giant in the industry, direct competitor of Elon Musk. Doesn't get as much press as Elon Musk, but his rockets are doing great things too, and part of this whole effort to drive down the cost of getting into space. And he's very much a visionary as well. And then, of course, Janet Kavandi, she is a senior executive vice president for Sierra Nevada, and also former astronaut. So what's exciting about these webinars that we've been holding, and by the way, we do have a YouTube channel, and all our webinars are on there, so we load them up after each session, so you can watch them anytime you want. What's exciting, what we ask everyone at the end of every session that we have, the last question always is, how soon do you think it will be until we have a economically vibrant community beyond Earth? And I have to say, some of the answers have been very surprising. Just for example, Mike Gold, his response was not soon enough, right? So he's totally on board. Pete Warden was a speaker also. He said he thought it would happen in 10 years because he believes that, he's tied in with the Silicon Valley crowd that are committed to doing that. Of course, that includes, of course, Elon Musk. So maybe he knows something that we don't, so, and Kathy Leaders, she was very enthusiastic. It was a joy to have her. So all these folks are, it's been really exciting. And we do have our next webinar. It's coming up. It's going to focus on finance, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's probably, we had a date set, but now it looks like it might be early June. It was going to be end of May, but it looks like it's going to be early June. But we'll keep you guys posted. I want to talk a little bit about some of the studies or the research efforts that we have that are in progress right now. And I'll try to go through these quickly. I know that we have until I hope you guys are hanging in there with me. But and I appreciate you. And I'm going through these very deliberately. I know that we have a total hour and a half for this program, so And so I hope, Michael, I hope it's not, hope it's keeping your attention. That's all I'm saying. But the study in progress right now. So again, I share with you a couple of the papers that we've done. Other papers that are in process right now is a solar power brief. So in all of these, when we do these briefs, there's always a policy aspect to them. So solar power satellites, for those of you, well, just very briefly, it's the idea that you could put a very large solar array in outer space and you could safely beam that energy down to Earth, and you could use that energy. And in outer space, the intensity of the sun's rays is 10 times what it is on Earth, because the sun doesn't have to go through the atmosphere, right? And so for decades, there's been a lot of enthusiasm around, could we build solar power satellites? From our perspective of Beyond Earth, solar power satellites is an enormous economic driver that would create a lot of opportunity and also spur increased human activity in space. So we're very supportive of that. And there's been interest recently, particularly in the Department of Defense, to develop this technology primarily for remote, as a remote power source for soldiers, potentially soldiers in the field. And we're very enthusiastic about it, and we feel that there's an opportunity, there's a policy angle here to promote this. So that's what that paper is about. There's the Human Research Program. We're doing a paper on that, and it is it's not the sexiest part of NASA, but it is where if you're going to put astronauts anywhere in space, you have to understand how to keep them healthy, right? So NASA expends a certain amount of money on that, and we're actually currently reviewing that program, and seeking to identify where, whether that program, if there's an opportunity to increase funding for that program, to accelerate certain areas of research. And I think actually, I'll just share with you now, we're zeroing in on radiation shielding. So not entirely surprising for anyone on this call, but there are issues of food, there's issues of dealing with weightlessness, there's issues of pharmaceuticals, and health, just medical maintenance, and so forth. I see that those issues can be overcome one way or another, even weightlessness. But for the near term, and even for and especially for the long term, and for a community beyond Earth, a community on the Moon or Mars situation, it is the shielding from radiation, from the cosmic radiation, that is most harmful over the long term, especially if you're talking about communities of people who will decide for themselves to live indefinitely beyond Earth in one of these communities. How do we protect them from radiation space? On Earth, we're protected by the layer of the atmosphere that protects us. In space, you don't have that, especially once you go beyond low Earth orbit, you don't have that. So what are the technologies that can mitigate that problem and eliminate it? And so, and to be honest, there is not enough intensive research being done in that area. So that I anticipate that's going to be a big area of recommendation for us. Moving on to the Artemis Base Camp. This is another effort underway. We're looking at. The big question is, what is going to happen after Artemis? So Artemis, we have plans, right? NASA has this plan of going to Mars, right? By sending the first woman, right? You might have heard that, right? We're going to send the first woman to the moon. Did I say Mars? To the moon. And she's going to walk around and maybe we're going to plant a flag again. Nice. maybe we'll have a go-kart or
Oh,
something.
Steve, your mic's getting a little distant.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I hope it hasn't been like that for a while, but is that any better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just probably need to be a little closer. Um, so anyway, the question is what's not clear, and what NASA has not really been spending much time on. It's really not, and it's not so much NASA's fault. You know, there just hasn't been much effort put into, okay, well, what happens? They NASA has spoken about this notion of a base camp and having a permanent ongoing presence on the moon. So that's sort of a goal, but what we're not seeing is the programmatic effort that's matching that goal right now. And what can we do to enhance that? To recommend something in that area. So you see what we're doing. We're looking at opportunities on the very edges of what is currently being done, particularly in the U.S. The space program, right? So where on the edges can we push a little bit that gets us to the next step, right? So from a policy standpoint. And then we're also looking at financing space. So again, I mentioned before, how do you pay for it? That's a big piece of what we're looking at. So we're with our next webinar that I'm trying to work out the timing on. That will be a conversation around what kind of financing models do we need to manage the risk for a very expensive infrastructure and human habitat facilities in space. And there are some interesting models that people are putting forward. And so what we are doing, what Beyond Earth is doing is, okay, well, we are going to review these models. So first we're going to talk about the financing options and in a broad sense, right? But then we also want to look at what are the models out there that people are suggesting that can be applied, that allow us to manage the financial resources that will enable all of this, massive amount of infrastructure to allow us to get to that point of communities beyond Earth. Okay. Bigger research areas. These are bigger things, and actually, we decided we're not going to initiate them until we find substantial sponsors for this research. We want to do a comprehensive survey on attitudes about communities beyond Earth. Some of you may be familiar with attitude surveys that have been taken about what people think about space and space spending, and do you want to go in space? So those kinds of surveys kind of go back decades. And it's always very interesting to see whether, and people typically support space, but they don't support space spending. But there's no conversation, there's no questions really in those surveys about whether who in the public would be, if it was available and you could safely go to and return from a community in space, would you do that, right? So we want to start asking those kinds of questions. And what would that mean? Would you stay there? Would you take a job there? Would you stay there for more than a year? Would you stay there indefinitely? So these questions have never been asked. So we want to do that. We want to do a research project on norms of behavior. It's a little less defined right now. Humans Beyond Earth report. Whenever you see BE in here, I apologize. BE means Beyond Earth, if you haven't figured that out. So the Beyond Earth report will be an annual report, and it will measure the market of human spaceflight and its growth. So to a large extent, the game for Beyond Earth is a numbers game. How many people have traveled to and from space this year and and how many plan to do that next year and the year after that, right? So and ultimately, the larger that number gets, the closer we get to a place where people say, oh, okay, let's build a larger habitat, and maybe it's something we can call a community, right? So so this report would be very helpful in that regard, especially since we want to. Right now, if you look, there are a lot of market reports that look at the space industry. We want to carve out that section, right? So right now it's like $300 to $400 billion is the space industry. We want to look at that piece of that just deals with human spaceflight, right? And what is that projection for growth this year and year over year? That should be a very interesting report. And then we have something we're calling the leap clock, which is, oops, I jumped ahead, leap clock. This is, the leap clock is a fascinating, dynamic, algorithm-driven clock that is going to is going to determine a date in the future, and it's a predictive date, of course, when we will see the first community Beyond Earth constructed or operational, right? And it will be, when we get there, it'll be a way for us for folks to measure where we are. And the idea is that depending upon trends and conditions and input, the leap clock may go, the date may go outward into the future, or it might come closer to the present, right? So that will be an interesting dynamic contribution, I think, to the space dialogue. And some things that we're looking to the future, and let me I'll just go over these a little bit more quickly. We are forming an industry council. This is again, we talk about stakeholders, and so we want to bring these industry folks together and get them more involved. We're creating what we call working groups on financing, technology gaps, and governance, and that we're pretty soon we'll be making an announcement about a paper conference in this fall or over the winter. You could stay tuned for that. And of course, we're going to continue our monthly-ish webinar series that have been very successful for us. And let's see what's next. What's next is, and this is where I'm pretty much concluding, is we are always seeking partners, always seeking sponsors, always seeking people who want to be part and believe in the mission that I've shared with you and want to be part of that, either as a partner, as a sponsor, as a contributor in some way. And we hope that if this is of interest, if if you're excited by this message at all, certainly let's have a conversation. And I think that's pretty much it. I mentioned the Alexa Prize, a university competition for advanced AI. It's semifinals. Alexa off. Sorry, my Alexa just went off. So I don't know if that's ever happened to anybody. So anyway, that's the beyondearth.org. Please go there. Actually, I'm Steve, just Steve at beyondearth.org. You can please feel free to email me directly. And that is, and that's it. I really, let me see if I can get back to, stop sharing. So I can always jump on the slides if people want to go back to it. I'm hoping that hoping that some of that is is of interest and exciting to you. Certainly we couldn't be more excited about pushing this agenda forward. And and so anyway, I'm at this point happy to take questions or hear your comments or thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was very insightful. It's kind of like you mentioned, the space industry is like traditionally a lot of like engineers and things like that, and it's good to see a different perspective on it. It's almost like a way to think of it long term. And yeah, we saw that documentary on the Space Channel is The High Frontier. I think that's the name of the book too. And yeah, we didn't know his story before, but that is great. So I definitely recommend everyone watching that as well. So I have some questions, and then after that, I just have a couple, and then after that, we'll open it up to the rest of the audience. And this is for everyone that doesn't know us, I guess we'll do a little intro. I'm Mike from New Space NYC, and this is my wife, Sadia, from also co-founder of New Space NYC. So what events do you see in the next 10 years that could kind of force space policy to happen? Instead of like, so you're trying to be proactive about it, but what events do you think could happen that would force some policy to happen?
Yeah, I that's kind of an easy one because it's already kind of starting to happen with China being so aggressive about their human space program and their plans to put a base on the moon, and and also they're partnering with Russia, and they're putting up pieces of their own space station. We're talking about deorbiting our space station. So ultimately, it could be as simple as a new space race that's upon us, that we feel that we have to be in and we can't not do. I find that sad that we have to, that may be the trigger, but that may be it. That may be it. Other than that, I don't. A long shot might be some sort of existential issue that comes up and makes us realize, wait a minute, we're vulnerable as a planet, so we need to diversify. I have less. I think that's less likely. And we just came out of this pandemic, and almost 1 million people died in America, and we just shrugged it off to a large extent. Except, of course, if you have a loved one that you lost, it's a huge tragedy. So, but no one's saying, oh, human race is at risk, therefore we need to diversify our population. Yeah, I'd have to say that if anything, it's going to be geopolitical.
Okay.
So the next question is, what is your vision of humans in space?
My vision of humans in space, it really is. Ultimately, I envision a future within, I would say, within a couple of thousand years, if not within 1,000 years, that there'll be more people living in space than there are people living on Earth. And I do ascribe to the again, there's a degree of like, if all goes well kind of thing, but I do ascribe to the Bezos vision, where we can restore Earth to a garden, and create a light footprint on Earth, and to preserve its natural wonders and beauty, and do all the any kind of nasty stuff we need to do it off planet. So yeah, I think we will become citizens. Humans will become citizens of the solar system. Certainly within the next couple of 100 years. Mm-hmm.
All right, and then a flip question to the first one. How much of a catalyst do you think good space policy could enable that bright future that you're that you're working for?
Right. I mean, that's our aim, right? So if we're not, and it's going to be a little hard to quantify that to a degree, because events may overtake you, whatever your best ideas are. I think there's a degree of like being ready. I mean, to a large extent, our mission is to soften people to the idea, soften the what we call the space intelligentsia to the idea that space settlement is coming, and we need to be thinking of policies that will help to us to transition to that period of human society. And I think it can help to advance. So if we had a few enlightened people in the administration, in Congress, in the international community, I mean, certainly you have countries like Luxembourg and others that may be willing to, or enlightened enough to sort of embrace this. And if they do so as a result of our recommendations, well, then yes, we will have moved the needle, So, but we go forward, obviously, like anything like this, you go forward with the hope that you're making a difference. And that's kind of all you can do.
All right, last question from Sadi, and then we'll open it up in the order. I guess we'll take the order that people raised their hands. So, all right, go ahead.
I actually have two questions. So the first one is, what measures is Beyond Earth Institute taking to outreach for minorities and women and children in STEM? And the second question is, so during your presentation, you kind of went into it a little bit. You said that the dialogue for, I guess, policy and laws are kind of on hold. And I just wanted to ask if you can further elaborate on that, if you can. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I think like any organization, we are trying to be as conscious as we can. Certainly in terms of diversity. I would, unfortunately, you didn't see a lot of diversity of our team members. We actually have pretty good diversity amongst these incredibly intelligent interns that are working with us. We have a nice cadre of 6 interns that are doing phenomenal stuff. I mean, we are still very formative. I mean, it is a commitment, and I think something that we will focus on more and more, particularly on the STEM side. And I mentioned, I think what you were referencing is the sort of the public outreach kind of activities, which would involve STEM related activities. And again, it would kind of come once we're a little bit, more established. Again, right now we're very focused on these policy questions, and which are very, they don't have, obviously they apply to everyone. So we're always going to look out for to bring folks on board to be more diverse. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to open it up now. Eva Blaisdell, you had your hand up first, so I'm going to go ahead and get you permissions to unmute yourself if you're ready now.
Yes, I am. Hi, nice to see you guys. Thank you for another very good event. There might be a little bit of noise because I actually flying.
It's a little hard to hear you. The volume's
Let me change something. Just a moment. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Give me just a second.
Oh yeah, that's a lot better.
Hi.
Yeah.
Is it better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, sorry, I am filming my Lady Rocket news for Vandenberg Air Force Base area. So we are actually not in the place where space is normally found. We are in the middle of a shopping mall where we interact with those who are not usually on our calls or meetings. Just like you asked, minorities, Black and Hispanic young people who gather up here. But going back to the question, Steve, it's a pleasure to meet you and see your stewardship of your organization. Now, the reason that I was very keen to listen to you is because unlike many other organizations, you have keywords in your mission. If I can quote exactly, it is economically thriving space communities, which makes me believe that ultimately your contribution to all this circle of opportunity will zoom on being the innovator of how to finance our space show. So my question will zoom on an invitation to the answer is what type of innovation are you planning to create in the economic model? Two, this is a question that has a double agenda, because I'm not only asking a question and making statements. I have successfully, for the last 4 years, independently, we founded economic platform for development of the space funding that is really going after billions of dollars. It's scalable. We launched it. We have the first participants, and totally independent of existing investors, i.e. VCs and other dudes, because their ROI is developed for the old-fashioned industries on planet Earth, have no business to put us and those that you explain and I chase against their old-fashioned business models. So we are creating completely new source of funding. Be happy to share with you our sweet secret. Part of it also involves NFTs, which we launched just last week. So the question is, let's team up and do the economic revolution, because technical revolution is taking place. It's probably the least need of the leaders like you and your capacities. It is about economic revolution, co-ownership and democratization of space, so the people of gender, like myself, like others, can have economic participation in a new economy that will be growing out there. So you got my attention, and I think you are, beautifully poised to be one of the major contributors to multi-trillion-dollar opportunities that we are really talking about, without traditional ROI saying, okay, how will you get my money back in 2 years? Those guys cannot afford to be a part of our endeavor. Let them invest with JP Morgan, not in our ventures. So thank you very much, and with excitement looking to your answer.
Well, Eva, your timing is good. You should definitely email me. Let's talk about this, because it sounds like it's something that dovetails right into what we're doing. We are we're not trying to find the answer ourselves. We're trying to find the answers, right? So can we be helpful in helping to percolate up the best ideas, right, and amplifying ideas, right? So so that you have an idea, and there are other ideas that we're going to be reviewing that people haven't paid much attention to. Through our work, they'll pay more attention to it. So what we're trying to do is raise the awareness of the absolute need for more creative funding options that will enable, $1 trillion investments over a 20 or 30 year period before maybe you see an actual return on that investment, and how do you do that, and so forth. And certainly manipulations of the markets and so forth is part of that dynamic. So yeah, send me an email. Let's continue this. Let's have let's talk and share with me what you have. I look forward to that.
And I would love to invite you. I host investors gatherings, usually during SpaceX rocket launch at Vandenberg Air Force Base, at the beautiful Mount Figueroa mountain, from which we can see actual rockets taking off. And then we talk about trillions and why we are needed to make it happen. So I will keep you posted and reciprocate your invitation.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye.
Great.
Thanks, Eva. All right, next we have Scott. Let me unmute you.
Hello.
Hey, Scott.
Hi, Steve. Great presentation. I had heard of your organization, but I learned a lot more. Especially excited because your main goal of helping to establish settlements is what I think should be the guiding goal of most policy. But my question is, what you think is the biggest legal issue or impediment to doing this? Is it the non-appropriation clause of the Outer Space Treaty, or how do you give authority to a community beyond Earth to govern itself?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a big question. What is the big? You're saying what is the biggest thing standing in the way of us doing this? Certainly, there are issues
legally.
legally. Yeah.
From
So
the point of the treaties and other things guiding everyone's behavior.
right. So the treaties, the treaties that exist, the international law that exists, is the challenge with that is that there's not clarity around that, and there's not consistent agreement around those laws. And I think we need to create that clarity. Now, it could be that like one of the big issues that we'll be addressing, which I actually it wasn't on the slide, but eventually we'll be trying to address this question of property rights, right? So you hear that a lot. Can you own that piece of space on the moon? Well, right now you can't, and maybe we don't want to ever really actually give people ownership of that. But you have the right but what's not clear is at least in terms of international agreements, is to what extent can you occupy an area and use the resources. Now, the U.S. government passed the space mining legislation, which said that, well, you can't own an asteroid or a part of the moon, but you could extract the materials from it, and you can own those materials, which is fine. But what about a permanent facility, on the moon, and what does that mean? I do think that we need to have we do need to have ultimately have an international agreement on that kind of an issue. It is a big issue. I think right now, to be honest, I think some of the technical and the financial issues are as important, if not more important, right now. So because if we can come up with scenarios for, say, a facility, there's a proposal for a facility, say for 100 or 1,000 people, say on the moon, for example, and it's very clearly thought out. We've arranged the funding for that. Before we want to go through with that, I'm sure whatever the consortium is, we also want to iron out any kind of rights to utilize any designated location for that purpose. I don't know if I've answered that. I don't see this as there being a single biggest issue. I think that I like to talk in terms of pillars, right? So that there are 3 pillars that we need to be addressing in terms of getting us to a communities beyond Earth. One is finance, one is technology, and one is governance or the legal aspects, or the policy aspects of it. And the policy aspects includes international law and so forth. So I see each 3 having to sort of progress in tandem. if that helps. I'm not sure if I answered your question, and I'm interested in your opinion too. I mean, if you have thought,
Well, I
that's
think there's maybe it could be separated into governing people versus governing territory. Avoid the question of whether you're appropriating or claiming national sovereignty of some kind and just govern people, which national laws would apply now. But if you're talking about a self-governing community that implies some kind of separation from, a Earth-based authority, and just whether is it a certain, do you have layers of authority or sovereignty or control, or that's where it seems to me is the kind of the issue.
Yeah, well, that's an important issue. So we use the term self-governing, and we've had these questions before. So there could be a relationship with a nation state or multiple nation states within for a settlement, but that entity can still be self-governing to a degree, right? And without necessarily being independent, right? So they are so we would say to a degree they make their own internal laws and so forth. I mean, I think that they would have to adhere to certain basic principles of human rights and so forth. But as long as they do that, they can determine, how they collectively choose to live. It's an interesting question. It's something that we're going to delve into much further as well as we progress. That's an important dimension.
Thank you, Scott.
Can I, Steve here, let me turn on the video. I'll wade in on that one a little bit too. Steve Wood, patent attorney, and I've got a Master of Law degree in Air and Space Law. I've studied the treaties extensively. I think under Outer Space Treaty and under the Registration Convention, it's pretty clear that, as Steve just outlined, that community would necessarily have a relationship with the launching one or more launching states. I think there can be up to 4 launching states. And so the launching states amongst themselves must choose who has legal jurisdiction. And then based on that legal jurisdiction, those, one or more launching states could give them some sort of semi-autonomous control, and then, potentially work towards recognition under United Nations or something like that at some point as an independent human, community, space community. But it would certainly have to kind of progress along those lines, at least under the current legal regime. Steve, I have a question on your pillars, technology. Being a patent attorney, I'm really interested in intellectual property rights and your perspective on, how they should fit into cultivating these space communities. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. How do you protect IP? We would. That's a good question. I think it's really, I'm not a patent attorney, and we haven't really delved into that question, because I could see scenarios where you would encourage a sharing of IP. So if you could certain IP such that it would enable greater development and expansion and greater adoption, and again increase the number of habitats that could be built. Certainly don't want to silo this. I mean, that's one of the, as much as we all worship Elon Musk, the idea that he would control human expansion into space is really not. It really can't be acceptable. And I don't think that he would want to do that either. And Tesla is a good example how he just decided just give away the technology and be done with it. And it would be great if he did that with wouldn't it be great if he did that with Starship, once that's operational, but that's, I do think that, we're very pro-commercial, so we want people to be able to we want billionaires and trillionaires. We have no, and billionaires, trillionaires will help to spur it all on, spur that process on. And so, and if that means they hold on to their IP, I don't know. It's a good question. So hopefully, Steve, you'll come and join us in that conversation.
Cheers. Absolutely. I have just come across a lot of research out there that really seems to indicate that strong intellectual property rights like patents, et cetera, really helps to accelerate the technological advancement and growth.
Thanks, Stephen.
Cheers.
Right.
Great. Thank you for your answer, and definitely appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Good. We'll be in touch.
All right. Next, we had Vivek Patel. So, Vivek, do you want to open your mic? Otherwise, we can read your question, if whichever is better for you.
Yeah, I can just ask the question. So this was more towards, thanks for your presentation, Steve. More towards the side of public spending, because recently Blue Origin, SpaceX, and Dynetics have come into the news regarding the Artemis contract. So NASA had a lower budget, had a budget that essentially didn't fit any of their financial requirements. So how do you see us turning public opinion towards space that will eventually reflect in spending? So what strategies do you think Beyond Earth can implement where they increase awareness towards space, or even just, because somebody like my mom, for example, wouldn't see the value in something like this, but I think that's a huge segment, tax-paying segment of the market. So is there something that you're doing there?
Well, yeah, I mean, good question, and you had a couple of questions in there, but let me, as I said, we will have a sort of a public-facing element to us. Right now, we think of ourselves as a think tank, and we really want to understand the core issues and how to influence the levers of Congress and so forth. We do feel collectively, we do feel that we have a role in getting out a positive message about human expansion into space, and we clearly want to be part of that. I will say, however, that the road to space settlement is not a road where NASA's budget grows or federal spending on space grows exponentially. So because that's not sustainable, it's not possible. So when I talk about financing mechanisms, they have to be largely those funds have to be largely commercial or private, and certainly international. The government does play a role. My preference would be that NASA wouldn't. I certainly want to see NASA's budget grow appreciably over time, and to be honest, that's about as much as you're going to expect, especially in this political environment. Except if, unless of course there's an asteroid that's heading directly towards us, maybe that's a whole other thing. But and that kind of incremental growth, it's not going to be enough. To be honest, we'll never get to a space settlement with that kind of, if we're relying on that kind of growth. It's really going to come about through a creative process of government involvement and government like being awake really to the idea that we've got to be moving collectively towards multi-planet existence, and they got to be on board with that. That doesn't mean they've got to spend a lot of money or they got to spend all of our treasure, but they got to be on board with that and helping to solve that problem and strategically spending their money that can help to align the economic and technological framework that will allow us to do that. So the particular issue of the lander, NASA's lander, right? So let's come back down to Earth, or come back down to like where we are in the moment. It's very important, and I'm not sure, it's hard to, I'm not sure if your mother will get this. She might actually. It's very important for competition, right? We need competition, and so yes, the Blue Origin team is more expensive than SpaceX, but we need to have at least two competitors to to work against each other, to have to, because if we go midstream and something happens with that single source, then we're really out of luck. You know, if something happens with we still don't know what's going. I mean, I'm surprised because there's not entirely certainty about the Starship. So God forbid something would have happened with that. And if it was a single source, then we, you know, so if we're going to do it, we should do it right, and we should have multiple players, and then ultimately you're maturing, you're helping two teams to mature to a degree where then they can then through the private investment mechanisms can hopefully begin to develop the lunar surface and lunar resources strictly through private means. That's the ultimate goal, of course. I don't know if that helps or not, but you're right. There is we need to elevate the number of people that believe in this mission or understand it, and and right now we're a very small percentage of the population, so there's a lot of work to do there, and it's not just going to be on us. It's going to be a National Space Society. It's going to be other groups. The challenge is you have a lot of space groups, but by and large, they're not really advocates of the whole multi-planetary existence, and so they're not really promoting that. So there are very few of us that are promoting that. So we do see that as our role. Probably not until again, probably not for another year or so. I would say that before we really are doing. Really are engaging specific programs to do that. I will always be willing to chat or talk or communicate, but probably
the commercial aspect definitely makes sense, where it's not sustainable just to keep pumping money at NASA. But from my perspective, if you don't want it to become a Cold War of space, then collaboration is necessary. So I see NASA as almost a symbolic organization that you can form more positive treaties around, right? I don't have any experience in this, so it's more abstract. But that's how I see these roles, even beyond Earth, where how do you enforce collaboration between warring nations or things like that, right? In space, if it's private, then it's all initially innovation, and then cheaper, and then it may be too late by then, right? So because there's so many players, but that's how I saw it. It was a symbolic collaboration that people can get behind. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Vivek.
Can I just jump in and give an answer about Elon Musk sharing his IP on a Starship from my meeting with Elon Musk?
Sure, really quick, Eva, and then Eaton's next.
Thank you. Copernic Space was introduced to Elon Musk during a special event he had a while back, and his response was very positive. He said, and right now we are organizing a task force to go and start working with him. He said, absolutely, he wants to do Tesla deal on his spaceship IP, because his goal is to make sure that there are other people producing rockets, because he's not really in a business to deliver all 500 or 1,000 rockets that he's forecasting. So now that we met financial and technology milestones of Copernic Space, we are going to reintroduce his commitment to himself, and we are interviewing IP attorneys and some other people to create a proper task force. So he's very open to this idea. He sees absolute need for it, and as a matter of fact said that he knows that JP Morgan's or existing equity funds or hedge funds are not really sufficient sources for funding the shared human show on Earth. This is also, there was implication of the interest in Copernic Space. So catch us when you can, and we are planning to present it to you in about 2 months.
Wow.
Thank you.
I look forward to that.
All right, Eaton, thank you for waiting. You are up next. let me know if let me.
Thank you. Yeah. I actually just wanted to comment on the issue that was raised before about property rights. So property rights in outer space is a complicated issue. I actually now have a book contract with Cambridge University Press to write a book about it. So I will know more in a few months. But I can already say now that, so first, there is a difference between property rights on artificial stuff. I mean, like anything that we're sending from us and property rights on many space resources. And the solution will probably not come from an international treaty. One of the main reasons that it's not feasible to make any international treaty, but there are also other ways. And there are other ways. There are a few ways that we are examining, and one of the ways is following. It's more like a bottoms-up governance, and we have some examples in the history of the law merchant that was also not based on government bringing laws, but on actors from different countries basically coming together and adopting rules because they all have the interest that there will be rules. So one of the possibilities is that the actors themselves who are interested in that will adopt some rules and will recognize each other's rights.
You're talking about a multilateral like agreement among nation states.
No. I'm talking even with actors. I mean, it will not be a multilateral agreements. The Caucus, the last treaty that it brought us was 1979, and there is nothing coming up the road. So there will not be a multilateral treaty, but it can be by agreement between the actors themselves, which may include even companies.
I see.
Companies and the actors, each of them will want to protect his or her or its investment and will be interested in other actors recognizing his rights for mining this area, and in exchange he will recognize the rights of others.
Interesting. That sounds like that would be interesting part of our what we call norms of behavior. I mean, it actually could be extended to, because you're saying it could be, we say actors could be corporations, it could be nation states, it could be nation states, could be, and then of course, and I think Pete, you know, you should talk to Pete Warden. I don't know who you're reaching out to, but Pete Warden talks a lot about this. Is all you need is like two entities, you know, two entities getting together and agreeing on it, and you know, let somebody else decide whether you're you know what I mean. And I think the direction you're going is once you have the actors agreeing upon what the property rights terms will be, then they will then that's it. That's sort of what you're saying, right? So you know.
And but also the idea, yes, but also the idea is that they have more incentive to put that forward. So the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, most of the member states there are not even spacefaring nations. So they don't have too much interest in having a system. I mean, it doesn't really affect them. But if you are a corporation who is going to do space mining or anything in the outer space, you have an interest to have some kind of regulation in space. So you will be interested to negotiating with the other actors. You will be interested in adopting some rules, and once you do that, you will be interested that everyone else, including yourself, will follow these rules. And this is and there were some studies. This can be described also as a polycentric governance, and there were a lot of studies that demonstrated that it is feasible and it is very efficient. And this might be our best course of action.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, and if you would share that with what you're doing with me, or let's be in contact, because I would very much be very interested to see how that research unfolds for you. And you know,
I have an article coming up on it. I can share it with you.
Great. I look forward to it.
Yep, the email's steve@beyondearth.org, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Great. Thanks, Elon.
Again, I can go to the website, I guess, and find your email, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's as Michael said, it's just Steve, S-T-E-V-E. Actually, I'll put it in the chat field, right? Can I do that? Let me just, I should have done that earlier.
Yeah, I got it in the chat there now.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay.
So I can send you the draft article. It's now in the editing phase, so the final version will be a little bit different, but the draft is 98% of how it will look at the end.
Okay, great, thank you.
Cool, thanks, Ethan. All right. Oops, I muted myself. Next we had Adrian. So do you want to ask your question, Adrian? Or if not, we can read it for you, if whichever is better for you.
I was not aware that I had submitted a question except in the direct chat for everyone to see as a comment on other stuff.
Oh, okay. If you don't have a question, we can...
That said, I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I was planning on submitting this by email, but since I have to chat. Steve, so are you open to discussing specific actionable paths to starting to achieve economic settlements on the moon? Because I have actually been studying them, and I've been trying to socialize a few suggestions. And if so, shall I email them, or is this a proper venue to lay them out?
I would say send them to us. And what we're doing is, as I mentioned very briefly, we are reviewing different options. And the ones that kind of rise to a certain level, we will have a workshop. We'll actually workshop them, and there'll be a panel of financial experts that will listen attentively, read whatever materials that you have, and then give comment, critique, discuss, ask questions, and so forth. And that will then be folded into a larger report on the subject. So again, it's us. What we're looking to do is to mostly raise the question that we got to be creative about financing, and then by doing that, highlighting, hey, here are some, here's some interesting ways we're going to do this. It could be through the financial markets, as Eva was saying. It could be through creating a model like a port authority, type of quasi-government entity. There's a fellow out there who wants to create something called a space corporation that would basically be created by the government but be private. So there are different models out there. So yeah, and so I would love to see what you have.
Okay, I will submit a high-level write-up, maybe tonight, maybe this weekend. I'll have it to you no later than the end of Sunday in any case.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Thanks, Adrian. Dr. Ken Douglas, you posted a comment with a question mark, so I'm not sure if that was meant for the chat or meant for Stephen Wolfe, but if it is a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and we can discuss it. And if not, we'll assume that it was for the chat.
No, I'm here.
Oh, I think he was just looking for Vivek's LinkedIn address.
Yeah, well, that too. But that's a great session, webinar, Mr. Wolfe. I really really appreciate the information you handed off to us. And I was just wondering, in the era of decentralized finance, would it perhaps make more sense to go around the central governments of the world and go directly to the people, go through crowdfunding, go through venture capitalists to help us with all of our visions of where we should be as a multiplanetary, interplanetary species.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, some people will argue that you know, Elon Musk already is sort of doing that in terms of I mean, he's got to have some kind of war chest to get to do his his Mars missions. He plans to send people to Mars within 10 or 20 years, whatever it is. And so how is he amassing that? So there are, I mean, you know, we know that there are people in Silicon Valley that are willing to pool their own personal resources to make this happen. So, you know, is that enough? That's the question. You know, is that enough? So now whether you can, the challenge, yeah, and I think I'm sorry, a Kickstarter or something like that, you know, where you pool the money. I think there are some efforts in there. Whether that would that be enough? It's a little hard to say. Can only get, you know, usually can only get so far, but you never know. I mean, that could be part of a larger strategy, right? You know, that you know, but I think people want to see that there's a well invested plan, you know, and a lot of security behind that plan, a lot of money already behind that plan before they say, okay, I'll invest, you know, more some of my money into that. But you know, I part of our strategy is just trying to keep like not picking a winner. Not to say that we, you know, we wouldn't pick a winner at some point, but I think there's a lot more analysis, a lot more discussion needs to take place.
Thank you, Dr. Ken Douglas. All right. Vivek, was that a question to the chat or to the?
Sorry, I keep messing up. So, yeah, I guess the question is, what do you see as the biggest financial or catalyst to like scaled commercial investment in space? Because we've seen articles where they're commenting on asteroids and them having trillions of dollars worth of resources. So where do you think that tipping point will be where we would start seeing scale in commercial investment? Because there are a number of startups at the moment. There's even one that sent a module up to the ISS, but that's still at a very small scale and here and there.
Yeah, no, and I don't know what I don't know what the winner is going to be, whether it seems likely that it's going to be mining or mining in combination with something. So mining for specific, say, you know, water, you know, mining water on the moon, and that would be used to refuel rockets in Earth orbit. Mining minerals that might have high value either on the moon or in asteroids. I mentioned that we're also focusing on solar satellites, which of course, you know, with the climate change issue that we're trying to counter, the idea that we can have free electricity from the sun, a clean energy from the sun could be appealing, right? And that would be an enormous economic driver, especially if you coupled with that, you know, the resources that we use for the solar satellites themselves might come from the moon. So, so there's potential there. So it is important to understand that that a space settlement's not just going there and it's going to be like a research facility or something that's government funded, that it has to be, when we say economically vibrant, we're saying that it has to be essentially economically support itself. And so how is it going to support itself, right? So, so you're asking the right question. So I don't have I don't know what the winner is going to be just yet. It could be manufacturing, right? So there's a lot of indications that unique products can be produced in orbit or possibly even on the moon that could have extremely high value on the Earth. So that could be a game changer, or at least the first game changer. So, you know, obviously people talk about space tourism, and that depends. Maybe that actually could be, if we could get the price low enough, you know, to get into space, you know, if you could get, you know, a week on a space station as cheap as the most expensive vacation you could think of on Earth, is some equivalent of that, then that could be a driver in and of itself. So so I would but I wouldn't pick one. I would say that we need to explore those. And again, I have one of our team members is dying to work on these economic, what are the economic drivers and really listing those out and so forth. I think that we're trying to focus on the habitat community, and but the economic driver is an important part of that, no matter how you look at it. Good question.
Thank you again, Vivek.
Yeah, you're coming on the 8:30 hour.
Yeah, we've been 2 hours, and thanks for everyone.
I can. I'm happy to answer a couple more questions, but I think maybe maybe 8:30 is we can call it.
Yeah, I think in classic New Space NYC fashion, it's a smaller group with really high quality people and really good conversation. So thank you everybody for all your great questions. If there are any other questions, please just raise your hand now. Otherwise, we will start to say goodnight to everybody.
Just a last question about continuity of conversation. So is there a Slack channel, or where this is my first time to the meetup, so how do you keep the conversation going? Steve mentioned emailing him, but even just with the group.
Yeah, so New Space, we do have a Slack channel. If you go to New Space NYC, I'll post it in the chat. We have a group of people there. We're on Meetup and LinkedIn and Twitter, and we're gonna try to get back into in-person events. Probably for our next event, we'll try to do in person. Vivek, are you in the city?
No, so funny enough, my meetup.com location is set to New York, but I'm in Toronto. So yeah, it's just virtual. I was trying to get out and check out virtual events, and then I found you guys.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for coming. We asked some good questions, so we enjoyed it. Yeah, definitely. I posted the link there, so please sign up. And then Stephen, I'm sure if you go to beyondearth.org, and is there any other places that we can learn more?
Well, if we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and so you just search Beyond Earth, Beyond Earth Institute, you'll get there. And then the website is, let's see, website is just beyondearth.org. And did I type it out right? Beyondearth.org, yeah. And that's our that's where a lot of this information is available. And I don't know, now we have to get people on our mailing list. Michael, do you have folks' addresses? I mean, I know I think I've seen your name registered for some of our events. I know you've registered at least a few times.
Yeah, I joined the last one about the military conversation.
Okay.
That was pretty interesting.
Good.
For emails, this was a mix of things. So it was some people from Facebook, LinkedIn, Meetup. I think we have the emails from Meetup, but from the other sources, we can ask those people, I guess, if we want to. If anyone wants
Well,
to
if
follow
anybody, you know, obviously anybody who responds to me, we'll make sure they get on the list for sure.
Okay.
And you know, yeah. So just generally, if you email me, I'll make sure you get on our mailing list for the event. Otherwise, you know, otherwise we'll be posting our event shortly on one of our social channels and on the website for that matter.
I see people are volunteering their emails into the chat, and so Steve, we will have a log of the chat as well that we can share with you.
Oh, okay. If you could do that, then I'll make sure they get in there. Great. Okay. Cool. This is fun. I really appreciate it. You guys asked some great questions. And thank you for letting me share the full slide deck for the first time. I hope it came across well for you guys.
Yeah, I hope the conversation helped you know, get different perspectives on it as well.
Well, yeah, no, that's what it's all about, really. Yeah, definitely came away with some thoughts for sure. So I really appreciate that. I'm glad it wasn't one way. So for sure. So thanks.
Yep. So
and yeah, we'll see you, Michael. We'll see you guys soon, I hope too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Have a great weekend. Bye now.
Thank you. See you.